importantly, you have your growing family ahead of you.
Oh yeah.
You've said before, you want to be the father to your kids that you wish your own father was. How would you describe your relationship with your kids?
It's intense. My kids are homeschooled, and but they get taught they don't take time off.
Right.
So they always have a teacher going. So they're learning 12 months a year. They come on tour with me, no nanny.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. This last one was pretty rough. They were on about 10 days of the Green Day run on the East Coast, and it was rough.
I can't even imagine.
When people give stock advice, they go, don't take my advice. So I'm going to say this before I say what I'm saying. Don't take my advice on parenting. My decision, I've certainly discussed it with my wife, is I want my children to understand critical thinking the best they can now, so that when they get in those teen years where they're going to have a lot of choices, and we all know what those choices are on the internet, I want to instill in critical thinking in them now, so they'll make good decisions when I'm not standing over their shoulder at 14 or 16 or even 20. So we kind of pay the price of letting them run a little bit more loose, mentally and verbally, than probably most kids their age. The people that have been around them are shocked because they're so verbal, they're so communicative.
Yeah.
They'll tell you what they want, they'll tell you what they think. And there's an intensity there that comes from my family of line. I'm pretty honest about that. But and it's interesting sometimes to deal with my intensity in the reverse. I'm like, well, now I know why people sort of get cut off by me sometimes. It's kind of a force field vibe. It's like slow it down.
I love it. I feel like I'm the same way. Yeah.
Well, hard chargers. So letting them kind of I don't believe in letting kids run the show, but I believe in putting them in a position where they have to make really good choices. It would be so much easier when you're at a restaurant to just be like, here's the phone, eat the cookie and leave it alone. And sometimes it's like, no, you can't have the phone because you're being a jerk. So make a decision, and they got to kind of do their own math.
Right.
And there's an extra 10 minutes, and sometimes it works, and other times it's like they just keep on being a jerk. Yeah. And they're yelling at you that you won't give them the supplement, and you're the worst dad ever, and
all the things.
Yeah, and you're sitting there like, but that's kind of the decision I've made, is I really want them, because at some point somebody's going to wave something in front of their face, or they're going to see something online, and I really want them to have their own sense of self, so they'll go, you know what, I know this isn't good for me because it makes me feel bad. And then in turn, I want to be able to communicate with my parents what I'm going through.
Right.
I love this. I didn't read all of it, but I read a lot of Bonham's book, and he talks about a point where one of his daughters, they start to have that kind of teen moment. And he pulled her aside and said, no, we don't really have to do this. Like, I don't have to be the dad that doesn't understand, and you don't have to be the angry teen. And he says quite openly in a book, he says he feels they got around that, but Bono's wife Valley said, not really, because you weren't there. But I love the idea
of talking about it.
Yeah. Like, my biggest pet peeve as a parent, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is like, just you wait. You get that?
Yeah.
Because you got little ones. It's like, just you wait until they're blank, and you're like, it's almost like this sentence on you.
Yeah.
Like, here comes the doom. You're gonna find out the internet. And I'm like, I don't. It doesn't have to be that way. One time I had a parent get up in my face and said, "There's nothing you can do. The internet and the phone, and you're going to lose to them, and blah 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 blah."
Wow.
And I said, and they said they're challenging me. What are you going to do? And I said, I will take my kid, and we will go to a cabin in the woods where there is no Wi-Fi, and I will walk away from all my commitments for 30 days or 60 days, and it'll just be me and him or her, and we'll be fishing.
Right. Grounding force.
Well, that's it. And one other quick story. So both my kids are playing baseball currently, but last year only my son was playing. And, I'm the dad on the side. No, I'm screaming.
Yeah, like coaching on this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Alpha, run. And, other parents are looking at me, and my wife pulls me aside and says, you need to chill out. And I said, hey, I wish someone was on the sideline when I was playing, willing to yell at me.
Oh, yeah.
She said, okay.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
What do you?
Because that's what I wanted.
Yeah,
I
of
wanted
course.
someone to actually stand there
And care.
and care.
Yeah, care and be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gift.
I found myself in those situations looking for surrogate parents.
Yeah.
It was coach or
Mm-hmm.
the cool dad,
Right.
who take you out for ice cream and tell you could have done better.
Right.
Why couldn't I have that for my old man?
Yeah. And now third one is on the way. What do you hope for your legacy for your children?
Well, you're asking the tough questions there, H. That's a tough one. Not because I have a lot of thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
First off, just because I know how my life is rolled, my children are going to have to navigate who the world thinks I am versus the person that they know. And invariably, if I'm not here long enough, they're going to have to navigate that, not just personally, but they're going to have to navigate the estate, the songs, the whatever I leave behind in my work. So I really want them to have a sense of who their family is and who their father and their mother are. Because I lost my mom when she was 49 to cancer. I lost my dad 2 years ago to just abusing the hell out of himself at 74. And there's just a lot I don't know. I'll tell you a quick story. A woman reached out to me who was a fan, and she said, I have terminal cancer. And I know you went through this with your mom, and I have 2 sons. What do you wish your mom did for you in her dying that if you had it to do over again? And I said, I wish my mom wrote me a letter.
Oh. Yeah.
Like, let's call it a rainy day letter.
Yeah.
And she was in that situation where they told her she had like 2 months to live. And she ended up living like way, way longer. And I'm not saying she credited me with it, but she said that conversation opened her up to this idea that every step of her life from that point on didn't have to be an ending.
Mm-hmm.
That she could sort of create a different pathway. And she felt that had a lot to do with her change in disposition and a lot to do with her living. So that's a bit morbid way to put it, but I want my kids to, let's call it, have a living version of that letter.
Yeah.
The letter, like, I know who my father is. I know who my mother is. I know who my family is. I know the good and the bad in a very honest way. I carry that forward, and I have the chance to fix that or sort of play into the curse of the Corrigans, as we say in my Corrigan side of the family. There's literally the Corrigan side of the family calls it the curse of the Corrigans. So I'm the same one. Is the point, or at least I think I am.
You were perfect just the way you
Well,
are, Billy.
Sure, but again, going back to what I said about my old therapist, it's like functional.
Yeah.
So if you're an eccentric person in the world and you don't quite fit in, and you can feel that pressure from a very early age, it's not always easy to find a way that gets you out of it while at the same time being yourself. Most people, of course, just put a mask on, pretend everything's fine, and I don't know, go see prostitutes or something, like hide behind some other
sort of
darkness.
vice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've done an amazing job of creating your own path, and it's led to you and your beautiful family, which is nothing greater than that. So
yeah, but that's again all power to God and all gratitude to my wife. It's amazing.
We love you, Chloe.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Billy.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. As you can tell, I'm enamored by Billy. I just am such a fan of his, not only as an artist, but as a person. I definitely felt myself doing this the entire time, soaking up every syllable. But how can you not? Just hearing his stories, his perspective. I just love him, and I can't wait to see where he's going with the new music. And I'm so happy for him and his growing family. There's nothing better. Thank you so much for being part of the Allison Hagendorf Show, presented by Cloudwater. A huge thank you to our other partners as well. Danny Limber Presents. Thank you, Road to Ruin Apparel, for my Smashing Pumpkins tank top. Arctic Zone for our guest gift bags, and most importantly, thank you. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would be honored if you subscribe to the channel, and I would love to hear from you. So please like, comment, rate, review, whatever you're feeling.
Hi, everybody. Rick Beato. Jimmy Chamberlin is known for his dynamic and complex drumming style, and
piano.
has been a fundamental part of the Smashing Pumpkins sound since the band's beginning in the late 80s.
So,
From the intricate rhythms of cherub rock to the explosive beats of Bullet with Butterfly Wings, his influence on modern drumming is undeniable. When I used to produce bands, I would tell drummers, it needs a Jimmy Chamberlin fill here. And they would know exactly what I meant. I got a chance to visit at his home studio in Chicago a couple weeks ago. Here's my interview.
Jimmy, welcome.
thanks, Rick.
I mean, I'm saying welcome. I'm at your place.
Yeah. Welcome to Chicago.
Thank you.
Well, Riverwoods, technically.
We actually just talked for the last 2 hours or so, so there's really nothing more to say here.
That's right. We've covered all the bases already.
So you're from a family of 6 kids, is that right?
That's right.
And you're the youngest?
That's right.
And we were talking about
That's
your
right.
influences by your siblings, about kind of your musical influence, diverse musical influence. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Youngest of 6. My dad, was born in 1925 and grew up very much in, the beginning of the American jazz songbook, the swing era. So, my dad also played clarinet. So a lot of Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, Pete Fountain, Harry James, Duke Ellington, Count Basie. So probably my earliest music was big band. And really what started attracting me to the drums probably before I even realized it was, guys like Papa Joe and Krupa, Buddy Rich, with the Dorsey Band.
Yeah.
But being the youngest of 6, my brother Paul is a drummer. I had a drum set downstairs, and when he wasn't home, I would get on the drum set and play. And he would come home and throw me off. And then one day he realized that throwing me off wasn't working anymore, and then he just introduced me to a teacher when I was 8, and I started taking lessons. But just by proximity of where my bedroom was in relationship to my sister Laura, my sister Nancy, my brother Paul being a drummer kind of introduced me to the broad strokes of who he was listening to.
Was he taking lessons at the time?
He wasn't. He was
Okay.
self-taught.
Okay.
But his rival in Joliet was Charlie Adams, who plays with Yanni now, and was very much a proper student. Took drums at Bill Crowden's
Okay, so
Drums Limited.
Why did your brother tell you should take lessons, but he didn't take lessons?
I don't know. It's interesting, I think maybe just to get me off his back,
So he wouldn't have to teach you, right?
So he wouldn't have to answer my dumb questions, about paradiddles and stuff. Yeah, so my brother was very much into, Jeff Beck Group, David Garibaldi, Ian Pace, Deep Purple, Zeppelin, of course, The Who. So the kind of broad strokes of what it was to be a rock drummer back then, right? But also had, was into Narada Michael Walden and the Mahavishnu stuff early on, before I kind of was. Bobby Caldwell from Captain Beyond, who became a huge influence for me, and I'm always surprised at how few people know who that is as a drummer. So I kind of learned, that part of drumming from him. My sister Laura, on the other hand, who wasn't a musician, was really, I would say, had a more kind of sophisticated palate. And Laura was the type of person that would drive around in her Ford Maverick listening to the AM radio WBEZ in Chicago. Marty Fay was the famous DJ at the time, and he would play everything from Mose Allison, Thad Jones, and Mel Lewis. He was playing great sides of music back then. A lot of the songbook of bop. So Laura had all of these crazy records in her collection, including like all the Steely Dan, all the Ricky Lee Jones. So I learned about the obvious drummers from my brother Paul, but Laura was she was the person that really got me into the finer points of how drumming fits into a narrative. And she was the one who first sat me down and made me listen to Jim Gordon, like Low Spark of High Heel Boys, or like the first Ricky Lee Jones record.
How did she know?
No one knows.
That's so.
It's such a crazy, she's not with us anymore. So, and it's crazy. And I'm like, it's easy for me to get teared up talking about this, but it's crazy how much impact she had and continues to have on my drumming. Because she really taught me that it's really not about the homogeny. It's about the inconsistency, and it's about the nuance that makes everything 100% better than everything else, right? It was the way Jim Gordon didn't play like anybody else,
right.
and the way, you know, Mel Lewis played big band, and the way like Mose Allison played piano, and Joe Pass and John Guerin, right? I mean, Steve Gadd. I heard Steve Gadd for the first time in my sister's bedroom. Rick Marotta, another drummer, and she was just one of these people who was like, she was tuned in to like horns and drums. Like my old school, Steely Dan, like listen to that horn part, right? With the baritone sax.
But she wasn't a musician.
She wasn't a musician. She was just,
Where did that come from?
you know, I think it was largely environmental. And it was really, you know, she hit that sweet spot in music where, you know, she was very much into Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
My oldest sister, Patty, was very much into the Beach Boys. So, you know, I heard a lot of Hal Blaine in the house.
Okay.
Age of Aquarius, like, you know, that stuff. My sister Nancy was very much into the Temptations, Marvin Gaye, Bill Withers, that type of stuff. So as a kid, I mean, there was really no, you know, we talked about it, there was no genre allegiance in my house.
Right.
And my mom would listen to everything from Frank Sinatra, like a nauseating amount of Frank Sinatra, Only the Lonely, like on repeat till you want to shoot yourself. At any point, if you walk through my house, you could hear like Moonglow with Charlie Christian coming out of one speaker, and like Are You Experienced coming out of another one, and like Dance of the Maya coming out of my brother's bedroom, and like, you know, Psychedelic Shack. Once I started to play the drums, I realized kind of early on that it was kind of what I was after as a young person, was really a way to articulate my emotions, right? Because and without being able to articulate that as a destination, I can reverse engineer my thought process now and go, oh, as a young kid in a large family who didn't really have a voice.
Didn't have a voice because you were the youngest.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was getting beat on all the time.
Sure.
I had ass, which wasn't fun. Or they would tickle me till I would vomit. Right. I mean, you had brothers, right? 7.
From 7, I'm second youngest, and I had a sister Pat, and I have a sister Pat and a sister Nancy.
Yeah, they can probably always go clobber you. And so I think for me, when I kind of think about like why, you know, I was so attracted to drums, it was a way for me to voice my opinion and to talk emotionally without anybody having the ability to counterpoint.
This first drum teacher of yours, was this something that you pursued for a long time? Did you always take lessons?
I took lessons from the time I was 8 till about the time I was 13 or 14.
Well, did you start with rudiments, things like that?
Stick control, George Lawrence Stone.
Playing with a practice pad, or would you play drum set, or would you just actually
I just had a snare drum.
just a snare drum?
I got a snare drum, and then my brother gave me his 68 Sonar kit when he got his Clear 5s kit.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And that was my kit for a long, long time until I earned enough money with that drum set to buy a Ludwig Classic, I think when I was 14 or 15, because I had started playing professionally pretty early. I played in a polka television show and a polka radio show and any gig I could get, you know, but I could make a lot more money playing those gigs than I could with a paper route. So
Did you like learning rudiments and that, or were you frustrated that you weren't working on drum set at first?
yeah, I think I was frustrated like any drummer because it's hard, right? It's really effing hard to do that stuff, you know, all day long.
Yeah.
It's not, there's not a lot of meat on the bone for a young kid who just wants to beat the shit out of something.
Yeah.
But I stuck with it until it started to make sense. And one of the things that Charlie got me into was he was really good at expressing or articulating the musicality of rudiments, right? So he would point, like one of the first things we talked about flams one day, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big flams guy.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, in my spiral notebook where he used to draw stuff and write little pieces of music, he wrote the second drum fill from South Side of the Sky. 2 flams.
Yeah.
3 kick drums.
Yeah.
So he had a good way of pointing out, you know, the utility of why we're doing this.
Right.
He also put me through the Paul Capozzali book. So Around the Drums with Triplets, Around the Drums with Open Rolls, Around the Drums with Paradiddles, which still used today. There's a copy of Syncopation right there. Ted Reed on my piano, which you know, I'm using that as a Dawson thing to play swing patterns and using that to play kick drum. And I mean, I'm a bit of still a practice nerd.
Mm-hmm.
I have a teacher, this guy, Steve Lyman in New York, is an incredible jazz independence guy who gives me like 3 months of stuff that I can't do. And I come down here and just eat shit for hours. But I know that there's a destination, and I can see that by working on my independence, it makes my day way better.
I'd like to take a second to talk to you about this channel. Believe it or not, 57% of the people that watch here regularly are not subscribed. So I would encourage you to hit the subscribe button now. This will help me get even more of my dream guests in the future. Thank you.
So Jerry, when you're practicing rudiments, right, then would you go and learn tunes off records and
Yes.
practice to records?
Yes.
Would you actually crank the records up and wear headphones and
No.
and play? What would you do?
I cut the speaker. So we had an old Silvertone that I convinced my parents to take it downstairs by my drum set.
Okay.
I cut the speaker wires and,
Yeah.
and cut my headphone jack off, and I wired my headphones to that thing so I could play with headphones on.
Nice.
And then I stole all my brothers and sisters' records, and I learned every one of them, right?
You would just teach yourself all the beats. right?
Yeah.
And how would you incorporate the stuff that you were learning in your lessons? Would you know if somebody was doing a single stroke roll versus if they
Eventually
did?
you'd figure it out. Yeah, I mean, because, you'd hear somebody doing long rolls, or you
Or
hear
like a
somebody,
Motown, a 6-stroke
Yeah.
roll or something like that.
right? You
Yeah.
hear that stuff, right? Yeah, and you hear, Benny playing that stuff or whatever. You would try to figure out how to approximate it first. You can approximate a lot of that stuff with single stroke rolls. Do not, right? As long as the accents land where the accents land. But as you get older and you start getting into, the 5-stroke, 7-stroke rolls, 6 strokes, I mean, you start to realize like, oh, there's an easier way through the door. And that's kind of what the deal with these rudiments is,
Right.
right? And I still, when people see me play, they're like, wow, you do a lot of paradiddles, right? And I do, like, when most guys do like I still play that stuff. Like in Geek USA, those big open rolls are paradiddles, right? Because they
Right.
sound better.
Yes, yes.
They sound better because they're as opposed to
Yeah,
like-
they have a certain flow to them that
Right.
doesn't sound.
and coming from big band,
Yeah.
or coming from Krupa, when you listen to you start to understand that the role of rudiments is allow you a palette to apply nuance to things, right? And it's not just kind of this stuff, which works when you're playing Fireball by Deep Purple, or Pace. I mean, but what's funny about like Ian Pace and Bonham, very much big band guys,
Totally.
very much big. When you watch Bonham play, he's playing a lot of doubles. You watch Pace play,
Absolutely.
he's buzzing his singles like Buddy.
Yeah.
A lot of that bass drum stuff. Don Lombardi and Don from DW is one of my dear drumming buddies. As much of a nerd as I am, and when we get together, it's always hours. One day we were in his office and he had a board tape of Buddies, and we just listened to the bass drum, right? the whole concert. They played the drums. They played the instrument for the things the drums needed to be at that time.
They also tuned, like John Bonham's tunings are more like a bebop drummer.
That's right. Very
Yeah,
high.
very high tunings, huge drums, but
Mhm.
high tunings.
Yeah.
And they gave him a really individual sound and a melodic sound, I think.
But I think, and you'll appreciate this, right? As a drummer, one of the things that drummers need to be aware of that some of them aren't is the architecture in which you're inserting drums. If you try to take John Bonham's sound and play it in the Smashing Pumpkins,
No way.
you're not going to hear it.
No, you're
There's
not
no
gonna hear it.
usable frequencies in
No.
there. But Zeppelin was
People
essentially a
don't
trio,
realize that's right. And Jimmy Page's guitars were very small,
very thin.
very thin.
And the only thing that
Not in
had
a
it,
bad way.
no, and John Paul Jones was a very plucky bass player, and the only thing that really had density was the B3, right?
Yeah.
So you got away with murder with those drums. I mean, I brought Ludwig's in here thinking like, oh, this is going to be great, right? And it's great until you put stuff on it and you realize like, oh, these things really need to kind of be in a big band, or they really need to be in a place where these frequencies are usable. That's why like the Yamaha stuff just works for me, because there's especially like these Birch kit, it sounds good. And after Corgan's done putting 24 guitar tracks on, you can still hear the drums.
Now with Birch kits have a different sound than Maple kits do.
Yeah.
Like to me, they have more of a low mids or something.
Mhm. Yeah, a little more high articulation and a little more low mid, which is
Yeah.
what I like, because I don't like the bunchy. I play some Maple kits and some of them are great, but some of them are just bunchy in the mids.
explain that for people, because this
Well,
is kind of nerd.
So the tone that's coming out of the drum bunches up in the mid range, which is between like 500 and 900.
Yeah.
And that's okay if you're playing in a certain type of band. If you're playing bluegrass music, that stuff works great.
Yeah.
But in a dense rock band,
No, that's where the
there's-
guitars are,
yeah,
and then you end up
guitar.
dumping it out.
Right.
And so you may as well play different.
Right.
Maybe we'll play different shells.
Right, and if you take an equalizer on a song that's already recorded and you turn those levels up, you're just going to hear vocal.
Right.
So, which I want to hear drums. So that's why I play these, because I'm in a range where there's not much.
So your tom setup that you have here, right? You have the big tom, then you have the two.
14, 10, 13, 16, 18.
Okay, so how do you arrive at that with the basically like a floor tom here, but it's not quite as deep
Yeah.
as a floor tom
So a
tom would be.
couple things.
Yeah.
Corgan, there used to be a commercial on in Chicago called Starbeat.
Okay.
Starbeats presents What's Happening. And it was on everybody who lived in Chicago, especially Billy and I, who were up late at night,
Right.
saw this commercial.
Okay.
And it was all for bands that were playing like the Holiday Star Theater, like bands that were like kind of come and gone, right?
Yeah.
It had this thing. And then we both knew the Starbeat drum fill. And one day Corgan said, like, I had played something similar to the Starbeat drum fill, and he was like, "No Starbeat drum fill, please." And I was like, "Oh my God, you can't." You're right, but he had suggested at one point moving the toms around to have some more tonal configurations.
Yeah.
And because he had played with this guy Ron Rosie, had a similar kind of janky setup. For me, it was more about, we had that song "I Am One."
Yes.
For
First
me,
song on the first record.
you did your homework.
Well, it starts with the drum beat.
It does.
I mean, it's really
as all good
classic,
records do.
as all good records do. But that's the introduction into Smashing Pumpkins starts
Here we
with the
are.
drums.
Same with Siamese, right?
Yes, that's right. So I Am One, continue.
I don't get more money for that. So, so I Am One used to be a paradiddle on my floor tom.
Okay.
Right? So
Yeah.
just a paradiddle, and sometimes it would invert, sometimes not. I didn't feel like the paradiddle was a good what I wanted to hear. Like I was hearing too much nuance in the thing. I wanted
You wanted to more rock.
I want to be more like Don Brewer, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what would Don Brewer do?
Yeah.
So that's where when we recorded it, that's where that kind of took over. And then once I started to get into the kind of more jungle drum stuff that we were doing, because we had a ton of jungle drum B-sides, right?
Yeah.
In fact, there's one famous song called Lucky 13, where at the end of the song, you can hear me say, "I'm not playing any more jungle drums."
Okay. So this, that's 14 by 12. What is that?
Yes.
14 by 12. Now to mount that there and to move that around when you first put that on, it's kind of a weird position to be in, isn't it?
It is.
So tell me about that. Like, was that strange to get used to?
No, because here's how I look at it, right? I still look at this as like a big band 5-piece.
Okay.
So when I'm playing in my 14s over here, I'm a little bit like this. So my bass drum's a little bit over here, but I'm playing snare 14, 16, 18.
Yeah.
Right? So it's still kind of my same Sonar kit, which used to be snares 13, 2 16s.
Yeah.
So it's still very much a 5-piece kit, like I play like with my straight ahead gear. These drums I look at like a little bit more kind of percussive, more kind of accoutrement. I mean, now it's just my instrument.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of mind hurdle that you had to get around to kind of play it. What it does do is it moves your hi-hat way back.
Yeah.
So that gets to be a pain in the
is that
ass.
awkward?
It is. And I spent years with my foot back here playing.
Yeah.
And now, thanks to the magic of new technology, I have these cable hats, so I'm able to put the cymbals where I want them and have the pedals like this.
Yeah.
And that's why I, not recently, but a few years ago, was able to start playing double pedal. Because before, I mean, if you wanted to play double pedal, you're playing like this,
Right?
Because of that big honking tom over it. And the old stands were like,
Yeah,
they were like
I mean,
these
drum
rings.
technology has come a long way
Yes.
with the stands and bass drum pedals, things like that. Have come a long way.
And this is a 2002 kit. This is back when Sakai Rhythm still made Yamaha. Those guys were like family members for me. Hagi, who was, running Yamaha at that time, was like a family member. I mean, I've been to that factory many, many times. I sat with Hagi many times and talked about hardware, and we had a big R&D group at Yamaha at one point, me, JR, Dave Weckel. when I got signed to Yamaha, I had already bought a Yamaha kit because Elvin was on Yamaha,
Right.
and Roy Haynes was on Yamaha,
Yeah.
and Vinny was on Yamaha,
Right.
So everybody I
That's
wanted,
right.
everybody I
So you
wanted,
get-
yeah, everybody I cared about was on Yamaha. You know, back then, they weren't giving endorsements out. Like, there wasn't a lot of rock guys on Yamaha. They were jazz nerds.
Yeah.
My manager reached out to who was Steve Edelson, who was the A&R guy at that point. He said, yeah, you know, Jimmy will take a look, you know, and see what he's doing. And so I told Steve, I said, look, you know, I'm cool with the endorsement and I'd be flattered, but I'm going to play Yamaha anyway. I'm not playing them because I want an endorsement. I'm playing them because these guys play them and they sound great.
Right.
So he said, well, come on in and we'll talk. And so back then when you went and got an endorsement, it wasn't like, hey, let's see how many Facebook friends you have or how many, you know, what your TikTok profile is. You went into a room, the guy talked to you, he's got a suit on, and I knew Steve was a drummer. He played on Name That Tune or something. He was like studio guy, right?
Yeah.
So he goes, okay, well, let's walk over here. So we walk into a room and there's like a red birch, like fusion kit on the ground. And there's like 4 Japanese guys in suits with their arms crossed. And he goes, okay, go ahead and play.
Oh
And I'm
my
like,
God.
play what? Right? Just play. So you get in there and you blow some chops and you try to burn the house down and, you know, guys are shaking their head or you see them talking to each other and I'm nervous as hell, right? No, I don't even want the endorsement now. I just want to get the hell out of the room.
Right.
But luckily, yeah, it all worked out and I got the deal and I've been back and forth a couple times to Yamaha, but we're kind of joined at the hip and they're such a part of the Pumpkin sound that I don't think there's any doubt that they're going to take me to the finish line.
I was thinking that the old Recording Customs had a massive the posts that went through the
Double
bass
tension
drum.
lug. Yeah. Oh yeah, right.
Now this is much more practical. It's a smaller post and everything. Why did they have that on that big post that went through that?
Well, don't forget that the Recording Custom toms back then were all square toms. The 12s were 12 by 12,
That's right.
right? So
Yeah.
and the drums had those big heavy lugs on them. So
Yeah.
it's a lot to put 2 toms on a bass drum like that without it flexing.
These are all the things that had to be overcome over the years. So people don't realize this about drum hardware.
So it got so crazy that I called up Joe Testa and I said, look, I was making the first Complex record and Dave Weckl had lent me his Birch kit. He said, I was coming to Pasadena and Dave said, oh, my kit's at SIR, just use mine. Oh, awesome. So I was like, why does Dave's kit, it's got the same problem as mine. His 12-inch, his kit had a 12-inch tom there. And the reason I used a 13 is because the 12-inch tom was phase canceling with the hardware. So you would pick up the drum and it would sound great. And then you would put it on the mount and doop, doop, doop. So we had this whole shitstorm at Yamaha, right? That's crazy. Because now Weckl is in complete agreement. Like we're the only 2 people like who are waving a
Notice
white
that.
flag.
Right.
Hang on.
Yeah.
So Hagi comes and he sees like I had a kit with a 12, but now I got the kit on its own stand, a cymbal stand off to the side, and that's what got this Hagi invented this system, this Yes system that they still use on an airplane napkin on the way back to Japan. Because when the rod would go through the drum, the harmonic of the rod, the frequency of the rod would eat the phase of the drum and you got phase cancellation. Right?
Yeah.
So we would get like these people would be like, who is this? Right? I mean, we would get that nitpicky about the drums.
You don't use any deadening in your bass drum.
No.
Have you always been like that?
I mean, you know, back in the old days when it was, you know, we were playing the Metro, I mean, you had to have a pillow in
Okay,
your
but
bass drum.
when you recorded Gish,
whenever
was there nothing inside the bass drum then?
Well, here's what we did with Gish. I had a 22-inch bass drum, and we took everything out of the bass drum, and Butch made a foam tunnel.
Yeah.
So that's what we did back in the end. You put the RE20 at the end, right?
Yeah.
And you had, you know, a couple mics in close. So I don't think we used any muffling, but we attacked it from
Okay, actually explain to people why you use the foam tunnel.
Yeah, so you just want to be able to elongate the availability of the frequency, right? Because low frequencies are very long. That's why when a car drives by, you can hear the bass notes coming through your house, because if the wall's not thick enough to stop the frequency, which could be this long or as long as this room, it will just simply go through whatever it is. So in order to facilitate the capturing of the low end, you create a delivery vehicle to the microphone.
Right, and so the mic is placed back here. There's a tunnel, and the tunnel also serves to take the cymbal spill out
A little bit,
a
yeah.
little bit.
Yeah, because cymbals are always.
This is an old school recording technique, though.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it really is. And Butch is from the old school
That's right.
of recording. When I interviewed him, we talked about these kind of things.
He loves this shit.
I love this too. So, but there's nothing.
There's
inside
nothing
your-
in that bass
your
drum.
bass drum. This bass drum is 22.
It's a 20 by 16 or 20 by 18.
Okay, but you prefer what?
22 by 14.
Okay.
And I use nothing in it. It's like a big band drum.
Now we talked about this earlier about the theory of having a more shallow.
The
bass
longer
drum.
the distance, the more time it takes from the batter head to get to the sympathetic head, the resonant head.
Yeah.
Right. And what happens in a bass drum is when you hit the head, the sound goes like this. It goes this way and it hits the side of the shell, and then it goes this way. And if it doesn't get to the head, it hits the shell again, and then it goes this way
Yeah.
again. So,
Exactly.
so with the shallower bass drum, what ends up happening, it hits the shell and it hits the resonant head,
Yeah.
and you get some back, right?
Yeah.
So that's why, and I think, going back to the way that I heard bass drums, whether it was, Cozy Cole or
They were all
Billy
14
Higgins,
inch. They were all 14-inch deep.
Yeah.
Those bass drums.
it's the classic sound.
Yes.
And it's really comes down to and it's a little easier to play because you're getting it's like putting a good exhaust on a car.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of that back pressure
Yes.
that
And
increases
it makes
the
a
horsepower.
difference
Right.
with your foot.
It does.
When you were doing those really fast things, we talked about Jelly Belly, which is one of my favorite drum parts of yours.
Wait, you said you wouldn't talk about
I'm going to talk about Jelly Belly. It's got the super fast bass drum. I mean, it's an incredibly hard beat.
It's
and-
impossible.
Jelly Belly.
And you did that all with one
That was a single bass.
pedal.
Yeah, it's not anymore, folks. But it used to be. Yeah, I used to play that with one pedal. And that song was so difficult to record.
Yeah.
And Flood loved it. He
Yeah.
thought that song. We were going to pick that song for our first single.
One of the hardest things to do is to write a great up-tempo song. And Smashing Pumpkins has a lot of great up-tempo songs. But that's an incredibly melodic song. It has all these great riffs, and it has the killer drum part.
Yeah,
Why didn't you have it as your first single?
maybe because we probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
That was us, not the record company. We in our defense, we had an ally at the record company at that time that we really, really trusted, Phil Corderero, and who's no longer with us, but was really kind of our ace in the hole for a long time because Phil's musical understanding was really just beyond anybody, apart from like an Elliot Roberts or like that level of a musical savant. In fact, Phil had received the songs, the Melancholy rough mixes with no vocals in them, and still was able to pick the first 5 singles without hearing any vocals, which is, I mean, I couldn't have done that. Billy couldn't have done that. I mean, that's like my sister Laura. Like, where does it come from, right? But yeah, Jelly Belly was such an incredibly hard song to play, and Flood loved it so. And so every day we would come to practice or to the studio, which was our rehearsal space,
Mhm.
and we were set up in a circle. I was here, Billy was opposite me, Darcy was over here, and James was here. And before anybody did anything, because we figured out the hard way, like if so and so eats a cheeseburger before we gotta track this fucker, like it's not gonna happen, right? Or somebody, right?
Right.
You see
Yeah.
the blood sugar go up, down, and then all of a sudden, like the bass pocket's weird. You're like,
Wow.
what's going on? Like, how many Diet Cokes did you drink? So before anything happened, we would try to play Jelly Belly every day. Okay, before anything, or Ode to No One, like those songs. Like
Yeah.
we would try to play those songs, and it was always, like, the car on the ice skittering down the highway out of control, and you just try to capture that one version of it. And that day it just happened to be where nobody made any mistakes, because generally when we would record, we were recording straight to tape, no click, no editing. So the drum part had to be the drum part. There was no ability to go back and fix anything.
Right.
Everything the Pumpkins ever recorded from Gish to Zeitgeist was straight to tape, no click.
Okay.
Commando, right? Like all commando, with the idea that we're going to keep the drum track and we're probably going to replace everything else.
Right.
Every once in a while we would keep something, but not usually. So, but with the drums, with everybody set up in a circle and the drums pumping through, we had a full PA, the bleed if somebody made a mistake would come through.
Sure.
So now you're not only driving your bus, you're trying to mentally drive everybody else's bus. Like you're looking at so-and-so who made a mistake yesterday, or Billy screwed this part up, or I screwed a part up. You know, you're thinking like, oh my God, this is so intense. But you hear it now when I listen to that song, which, you know, I didn't listen to it a lot back then because it was so painful. But you listen to it now and you hear the freneticism is,
It's amazing.
What
That's
Flood
what's so
understood that
sad.
I didn't understand.
Youth, you know, that energy.
Insanity.
Yeah. Going back to Gish, when you recorded Gish, had you been in studios very much before that?
No, I mean, you know, a couple times with the Pumpkins, and I had been, you know, made some polka records, which were great. I mean, if you want to learn how to play rudimentally, go play with an accordion player, because you got to play quiet and you got to play precisely and you got to play fast.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, the beer barrel polka may sound like a joke to most people, it ain't a joke to the drummer.
It's not.
So no, I didn't have a lot of recording experience. In fact, I was, you know,
Did it drive you nuts to get drum sounds and things like that? Do you think like, God, why does this take so long?
I kind of, I mean, you know, Butch. I mean, you know, Butch. So Butch makes it like, you know, Butch is a drummer, so you
Yeah.
become kind of brothers in arms.
Yeah.
The Gish sessions, by nature of economics, didn't take that long. The drums were recorded in 2 days, and I think all of those songs, with the exception of Snail, are the first take.
And where did you do that record? Was
At
it-
Smart Studio.
At Smart,
Yeah.
which is place.
Which in a room, you know, Billy and I were in a room that's smaller than this.
That's in
So-
Madison.
We would set up his Marshall cabinet, you know, in an ISO cabinet. We'd have the headphones on, and he would be this close to me, and it would just be him and I, and Darcy and James would be in the other rooms playing bass and guitar, and we would just go for it. And we would rehearse so much, and we were playing live so much.
Would Billy even do a scratch vocal or no?
No vocals.
Just play.
No, we knew the songs, we knew the arrangements. So I knew where the solos were. I knew what solo was. I knew how I was going to articulate, how I was going to make room for stuff. Like we were always pretty greased up.
Would you say that was the case for every record, that you would be really rehearsed, or would there be things where there are songs that weren't finished yet?
Siamese?
Siamese was like that, right?
Yeah,
that was a
lot
real
of,
tough,
like the
tough
back
record.
half of Geek
Yeah.
wasn't even written. I mean, we only had the one part, so a lot of that stuff was done on the fly. Like I remember Butch saying, like, we need a fill going into the back half of Geek, and I was like, it was just one of those things where God just goes, here, I'm gonna give you one, but you ain't gonna get more, right? I mean, you know those moments where you're just like, you play something off the cuff and it becomes part of your identity, right, forever. So, which is the cool part about recording stuff like that, because you really, you know, it allows you to dabble outside of your comfort zone whilst knowing the destination. And I think that's where a lot of that energy comes from. And the recordings that I love, like we were talking about Passion Dance, right? Like that song, like the confidence in the destination allows the flexibility of the interpretation within the architecture, right? And that's how the Pumpkins recorded. Like I don't think I ever played the same thing twice, like in a lot of those recordings. Like I listened to Eye of the Morning because we were going to do it on tour off of Machina, and in my opinion, like Machina is when the insanity between like my ability, Corgan's ability, how much just insane confidence we had, and also on the other side how we knew that it was all going to end anyway.
Right.
Like that's the record, that record
That's
really,
record 2000 it came out, I think.
yeah. So and you know, right at the beginning of the Britney Spears, where we
That's
knew
right.
we saw the train was going, like it was done.
Beginning and the end of the music
Yeah.
business.
We're like, okay,
and
you
the
got a
boy
year.
bands and girl bands and all that things was you know, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, all that stuff was going on then.
That's right. So you got a year to make the soundtrack for not the end of the world, for the end of your world, right? Right. So you know, that's where that all culminated. But when I listen back to the stuff, it's like the relationship between the vocal and the ride cymbal is so intact, and there's so many mini conversations going on between Billy and I, with the way he plays a chord, or he hangs a chord, or what we would do a lot of times when we would play a verses, because we were big like Cole Porter fans, right? And we would study like that stuff and think about like arrangementally, why do we have to wait 4?
Right.
to change here. Like Billy and I would call it cutting the fat or screwing the ends in. Whenever the song was done, we would go back and say, okay, this doesn't need to be here, this doesn't need to be here, and we just screw the ends in until we couldn't screw them in anymore, and that would be the arrangement. But what ends up happening is through doing that, it's like the narrative reigns supreme, but it allows a framework for all these mini narratives, because the mini narratives are in on the story. They allow you to make these great choices within the context of the big plot, subtext wise, right? So like any great, impressions or any great song that's, whether it's modal like that or it's extremely tempestural in its arrangement, the confidence in the arrangement allows people to make better choices. And then I do this live all the time, right? Like Victor will tell you, like I never, like aside from the big fills, I generally don't play the same stuff every night.
But fills that people will recognize.
Yeah, right. Like the Cherub Rock fills, whatever.
Right, yeah,
That's,
do that.
yeah, I do all of that.
Right.
stuff.
I mean, and I want to just talk about this for a second. You do it because people actually recognize those fills, and they don't feel that the song is right without those. Do you think?
That's a good reason to do it, but that's
Yeah.
not the reason I do it.
Okay, well,
I do it. I do it I do it because I still think that's the best choice.
There you go.
So if I come up with something better, I'll do it.
Are you playing these songs in a rehearsal space always before the record, or does Billy have demos of some songs?
Both. But we're
Okay.
generally playing them until we have a thing, right? You have
Yeah.
to play them till they suck,
Okay.
and then you get back in there and figure out why. So you've got to put in that seat time, whatever the Malcolm Gladwell, whatever the shit is.
Yeah.
You got to go in.
10,000 hours.
You got to play, like Bozy always says, like, yeah, you play it, and then you go get a drink, and you come back and you can't play it. But after you can play it again, that's when you know it, right? So it's kind of like that with the arrangements. I remember we had when we did Zeitgeist with Roy at the Village.
Yep.
We had this song, Bring the Light, just a ripping. Oh, that whole album is just ripping, just a ripping tune. We had done 9 takes of the drums, and we had a front half that I really liked, and I loved this other back half. And Billy goes to Roy, let's just splice them. And the engineer goes, but you guys didn't record to a click. How are you going to do it? And we looked, and every version was
Exactly
the
the
same
same.
time.
Of course.
Right?
Easy.
Right?
Yeah.
It was the same
Wait a
exact
minute, I
time.
didn't realize you guys did that at the Village. Did you do it in the D
Yes.
in D?
Mhm.
And where did
Big
you set,
VR Neve,
yeah, so where did you set up the drums? Because they have that,
right, with
that
that
raised.
the crazy floor or the crazy ceiling thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, right in there.
Okay.
But that was one drum set. So that was kind of our pop drum set.
Yeah.
The other drum set was up in the haunted Mason
On the top
Masonic
floor.
temple. Yeah, where
Yeah,
the
yeah.
curtains would go like this at
Yeah.
night.
That studio D is pretty dry.
Yeah.
It's a very dry room compared to Triclops or other places that you recorded.
So we moved around a lot in that. We recorded some of the things at Coanga Pass.
Mm-hmm.
We recorded some of the rock drums at Sage and Sound, which was across from Ocean Way,
Right. Yeah.
a Gower
Yes. Yeah,
and
right.
Sunset, which had a big concrete bunker drum room. We recorded there, and we got some great drum sounds there.
You guys record around in a lot of different studios. That's particularly for the drum sound,
Yes,
right?
always. I mean, but to just going back to your question, do we know songs were going to be a hit?
Yeah.
Okay. The PC answer, no.
Yeah.
But as you know, you have to know. You have to know. You have to know. You have to know that it's all going to be a hit before you play it. I mean, or you have to be in love with it, like you would love something that's not necessarily lovable to everybody.
Now, a song like 1979 is so different than other songs that you had done at the time. Now, was that something that you thought, well, I don't know, how are people going to receive this song? You knew it was,
Had no idea.
okay.
Had no idea on that one because that was so out of our wheelhouse.
Yes.
So that was really a flood
Yes.
flood experiment, and flood,
Explain who Flood is.
So Flood is a producer.
Yeah.
And most famously worked with Brian Eno on YouTube.
Yep.
Worked a lot with Depeche Mode.
Yep.
Did PJ Harvey, 9 Inch Nails.
Band Curve that I love.
Yeah, Curve, right.
Yep.
Really known for his dark production.
Yeah.
And we were a dark band.
Yeah.
And Billy had met Flood We were actually at a Nine Inch Nails party.
Okay.
It was a weird party for us. I remember Burton Cummings was at the party.
Okay.
So start there. Because I wasn't a studio nerd, I never looked at records and see who produced anything.
Okay.
I mean, I knew like George Martin and the guy who produced the Deep Purple records,
Right.
whatever that guy's name was, right? You know, because Billy worked in a record store for many, many years. So his knowledge of liner notes was,
You can learn a lot by reading the back of records.
and he would tell me records that people that had done, and I'd be like, oh yeah, I love that record.
Yeah.
You know, but I never necessarily knew who the producer was. So when Flood showed up with Alan Moulder, who I've
Yep.
known, you know,
Love Alan.
from
Amazing.
Triclops days,
Yes.
you know, and Alan and I are very, you know, we were blood brothers back then. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you know, Alan and I worked a lot, really closely together. It was obvious that Flood was going to make an unconventional record in an unconventional setting with a band that was really at loggerheads with the record company, because making a double CD on your third record is
It's not the thing to do at the time, right?
right. Everybody hated the idea except for us, because Corgan wouldn't stop writing songs. I mean, he's like, if you leave him alone for long enough, he'll have a song when you come back. And you can go out and get a sandwich. You know, Kyle, like, I got a new. I mean, that's why we're going to Blackbird tomorrow or the next day, because he's like, hey, I went through the riff pile and there's a couple good riffs we gotta go back and record, right? And then I'm not, you know, I never say no. I mean, I'm always like, hell yeah. Always more fun to do. So, you know, Flood, he really allowed me in particular to explore and come to grips with what I was afraid of. Because he was really about, again, like all of the greats have the intuition they know to celebrate the inconsistencies and the things that are different, as opposed to hurting the homogeny.
Is 1979, is that played to a click?
Yes, it's played to a drum machine.
Played to a drum machine, right?
Or, and I could be wrong, because
Yeah.
again, I didn't produce the song.
Yeah.
It could just be me playing a beat and then chopping it and making a loop and then creating a drum machine.
Because that's something that Flood would do. That was
Yeah.
the thing that he did with U2, and they take a drum pattern and they would make loops. This before computers
Yeah.
did that.
And on Machina, we did stuff like Raindrops and Sun Showers.
Mhm.
That song, I played two drum parts. Doom, cat, doom, cat, doom, cat, doom, cat. And then that doom, doom, da, doom, da, over top of it. So we made a loop out of my part.
Yeah.
Then I had to play the song over the top of it, which to me, you know, having never played with a click before, I mean, that was really, it was tough, you know?
Okay, I want to go back to early on when you first started the studio sessions back, way back with Gish, and about some of the technical things as far as like drum heads. What kind of drum heads would you use back then? And did Butch say, hey, we should use this thing? Did you have a drum tech on that record? Did you ever have drum techs on records, or you would always tune your own drums?
I never had drum techs on.
Never had drum techs. Okay, so what drum heads would you play back then? Like what would
Whatever
you play
ones
in your
lasted
snare?
the longest.
Okay.
So, right?
Because you play small beaded sticks.
Not back then. I was
Okay.
playing 2Bs or 5Bs.
Okay.
So 5Bs up until probably Machina, and then I went to the 5A. And now I use a MJ4, which is a maple chapstick. I play whatever lasted long enough, you know, because I didn't have any money. My shoes didn't even have shoelaces in them because my shoes were used to hold snare wires on.
Okay, so but back then, you're on a major label.
Not really, because we hadn't been signed yet.
Is that when you started Gish? You hadn't been signed yet.
Well, we kind of been signed, but we didn't get in advance. So what would happen is we started playing in '88.
Yep.
We never spent any of the money. We put it in a pile, and everybody was left to fend for themselves, which
Okay.
is why I had to lie about working in a bike shop and all this other crap that went on. You know, I was sleeping under somebody's kitchen table or dining room table for a while. I mean, it was poor.
Mhm.
Billy and I was sharing cans of beefaroni. I mean, it was awful.
Oh, yeah.
So we had saved $30,000.
Mhm.
And when we went to record Gish, that was our money. We paid for them ourselves. And Virgin sent Phil Costello, who was the head of radio, and some other person from WEA. You remember WEA?
Yeah, of
WEA
course.
at the time.
Yeah.
Warner Electric Atlantic.
Yep.
Who were the distributors to come to Gish, to come to the studio and listen to Gish. and we were still not technically signed. So we paid for the album ourselves. So we were kind of like, we had a little latitude.
That's actually pretty advanced.
Yeah.
That's pretty smart for the time.
Well, you know, again, Corrigan worked in a record store, so he reverse engineered how a lot of these records that he liked got made, and how to keep, you know, the
Jimmy
tenor.
Page paid for the first
Right,
Zeppelin record.
Right. So there's a
The
lot of
precedent there.
there's a lot of information that he was in possession of that went into the ideology of the band. Thank
Yeah.
God, you know, because I didn't know shit about that stuff. I do now, but I mean, I didn't know a lot about it. So with that, Phil Costello shows up one night, and we're kind of done. We're not done. We've got stuff to play, but we're not. Maybe vocals are still being done because we are who we are. He sits down and he wants to hear, you know, a song that's going to potentially be played on the radio. So of course we play him Window Pane with the 6-minute intro. Boom, boom, gung, gung.
Oh my God.
Right.
Right.
And when it kicks in, I looked over and it was like the Memorex commercial where he's just like this and the speakers are, and he's like, oh my God, this is the greatest song I've ever heard, right? And we knew we were kind of in the door at that point. But yeah, it was dicey. You know, we had played for almost every major label and everyone said no.
That's actually a very common story.
I know, but when it's about you, it's your story.
Right, that's right.
And it can be dicey because we had all bet a lot on the band. Probably those guys more so than I, because I had you know, tons of stuff I could go and do as a drummer. But you know, being a songwriter and those types of things, that's not where those guys wanted to land.
Going back to when you had your second record, when you did Siamese Dream, how did your gear change? Did you
So yes, when I joined the Pumpkins, I had a banana yellow Gretsch kit,
right.
which is my Tony kit, right?
Yeah.
Those guys hated it. So once the music got to be more progressive and we started to play the stuff that was going to be on Gish, I needed a bigger drum kit. I needed the Erskine Weather Report drum kit.
Right.
So I traded a guy who worked at a music store in Detroit, my yellow Gretsch kit for his Pearl Birch kit.
Okay.
And it had 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, and the bass drum. And that's the kit that we ended up using on Gish.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and then snare drum, which is, you know, the most, you know, everybody sampled that snare drum because
Yeah.
Butch did such a great job. That was a Yamaha Steel Shell recording custom.
Really interesting.
I know, right?
You have that still or not?
Butch does. It was his.
Oh man.
I know. I just talked to him not too long ago about it. He's like, oh yeah, Jimster, I still got that drum. Yeah, the drums sounded so good.
So good.
And the room being small, like this room, it kind of self-compresses, right? So
Yeah.
it gives you a little bit of that back, like a little bit of that womp back to where you can really kind of dig in. You can really lay into stuff without kind of playing through it.
What do you use on your snare? What's your snare head?
Back then it was probably a coated dot.
Okay.
Now I use an Emperor.
Okay.
I use coated Emperors on all of this stuff and Ambassador clears on the bottom, just because these drums are pretty lively.
Yeah.
You know, I play straight ahead because I use Ambassadors.
Yeah.
On everything. I'm an open guy, right? I want to hear drums.
You have no deadening on anything, right?
I have a little bit of moon gel on stuff, but
Yeah.
that's about it. But,
Yeah.
Mostly on cymbals, believe it or not. So then we got to Atlanta, and I had my brand new Yamaha kit, and that thing was, you know, rocket ship. But a lot of snares, a lot of Ludwig snares.
Would you use different snares for different songs? You have more time to experiment back then.
Yeah, so like the Geek and some of those snares, some of those songs were used on Mark Richardson's 6.5 brass hammer brass, which he gave me after that session.
Oh man.
Yeah,
And you have that?
I think so. Yeah, and then you know a lot of Superphonics. I had a Radio King, the big stick crusher hoops. That was that was the verse snare on Today.
Okay.
So when the chorus comes down and sucks down into the verse, that's at Radio King. And I think either we set 2 snare drums up or we spliced drum takes where we recorded the verse with the Radio King and the chorus with the Yamaha.
Talk about as far as the ride cymbals. You and I were talking about dry ride cymbals and things like that, and having articulation, how it's important, especially when you play with really distorted guitars, to be able to hear the ride.
Yes.
And if you're bashing the ride, it just creates even more
murk,
more wash, and how it's important to actually articulate.
You know, the dark cymbal definition is a lifelong pursuit of mine. And I've talked to many drummers along the way in an effort to achieve it. And I feel like, the Istanbul is probably as close as I've landed to it. But I like dark cymbals. For a while, in order to get my voice heard, I was using A Customs Zildjian,
Yeah.
very brash,
Very brash.
gamey.
Yep.
That worked in that context. I used those on Siamese Dream. But when we started working on Melancholy, the Constantinoples were starting to come around, right? And I knew Lenny DiMuzio and those guys,
Oh, yeah.
and they knew that I was a cymbal nerd. I told Bill Zildjian this, but I had a Sabian endorsement at the time, and I told him later that I was using Zildjians in the studio because I just don't have it.
Jimmy,
I
How often does that stuff happen? All the time.
Always. I mean, always. But
Yeah.
everybody that endorses me knows that the only allegiance I have is to sound.
Right.
I really don't care. And it's not about the economics. I don't care about free shit. I just care that it sounds as good as it can sound. And I've always kind of been that way to a fault. But to answer your question, I mean, it comes down to usable frequencies, right? Without creating bunchiness, was what the pumpkins call it. We call it bunchiness. It gets bunchy in the mids, it gets bunchy in the highs. We want things carved out.
Yeah.
We want to carve out either a space for ourselves, or we want to have something that allows a carve out to happen. Stick articulation is, the first requirement. And then if you can have air or breath underneath it, that's the whole package. So for me, Elvin Jones, Roy Haynes on Now He Sings, Now He Sobs.
Yeah.
Jim Gordon on Low Spark of High Heel Boys. Tony Williams on One Finger Snap. Those are the holy grail moments for me for ride cymbal, because the ride cymbal, it's the palette I have with the most colors on it. The second one being the snare drum. It comes down to understanding where I'm going to land my plane when I start playing. And then if I know what island I'm taking off from and what island I'm going to land on, the stuff in the middle, the ability to connect the dots becomes a lot easier, because the journey becomes congruent. And I can stitch together the journey most effectively with the ride cymbal. Secondly, I play a lot, and much to the chagrin of modern production, I play a lot of notes on the snare drum.
Yeah.
I play a lot of ghost notes. And, Corgan has come to the realization that the nuance in my playing is really a big part of what we do. The yin and yang of the band is his right hand, my right hand, the vocal, and then the interpretive shading underneath it.
When you said modern production, and you're talking about like things where if you use rolls like Tonight that has a lot of snare roll things, but modern production, they get away from things like that, ghost notes and stuff like that, right? And it's more of like a backbeat. Is that what you're saying about
hit
that?
the drum in the middle, the same place every time.
Yeah.
I never hit the drum in the same place twice.
Right.
And I hit it in the same general area, but
If you're playing a song like Muzzle, for example, that has all those triplet fills in it,
Sure.
right? Are there certain tempos that it's like, yes, in order to have the energy, the tempo of that song is right? If it was any different tempo, you'd have to do a different subdivision. That triplet works perfectly with that tempo.
yeah, right. Thank you, John Bonham.
Thank you, John Bob.
Yeah, right. Dazed and Confused, Since I've Been Loving You, those where we learn to play those triplet phrases that are elongated.
Yes.
And I have to credit Jody Stevens from Big Star. I didn't know how to play alternative rock when I joined the Pumpkins.
Mhm.
I had no idea. There were a few things that I keyed in on. Stephen Perkins from Jane's, he's a very close friend of mine. But when I heard the Big Star record with Back of a Car,
Mhm.
and I heard Jody play those clean fills, I was like, that's what I've been looking for. And I told him that. I told him when I went to Arden one time, he was playing a Big Star gig and he didn't have any cymbals. So I gave him my set of cymbals. I said, here, this is for you. I said, in payment. And he was like, oh, I don't
Nice.
What? I said, yeah, man, come on. You had to know, right? It's like Buddy said, the best musicians are thieves that never get caught. I mean, it wasn't a straight rip, but I mean, that was the impetus for that song, right? I'm not going to deny it. Like when I was so loved that song, and I so loved that #1 record in Radio City, because it taught me so much about the drummer I wanted to be within the context of my band. And I didn't know before that. So I had been playing that song completely differently. And when I heard that song, I came back to practice and I started to incorporate all those Jody fills, and Porter was like, oh my God, this is so fucking genius. So, you have to be as we say, you have to be available for the download, and you have to know what the download means.
I would say to drummers when I used to produce, it needs a Jimmy Chamberlain fill here.
Right.
I mean that was a thing.
Right.
It's like this needs like a Jimmy Chamberlain part, and I would just reference you all the time.
That makes me so happy.
But it's really hard to write a drum hook, cherub rock, whatever it is, to write something that is instantly recognizable that announces a song.
If you land where you're supposed to start from,
Yep.
when you start to think about a song, when you think about how do I want to feel when the song gets played, the choices you make as an instrumentalist become way different than if you start to think calculously, how can I fit this in here? Or what is this? Like Rocket is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
The guitar part. Doon, doon, down, doon, doon, down, doon, doon, down, doon, 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 down. I mean, most drummers just play doon, doon, ka, doon, 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 ka, doon, doon, ka,
Yeah.
doon, 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 ka, ka. I don't want to hear that.
Right.
I want to
Because
hear
that's the most
doon, doon, ka, doon, boom, boom, ba, boom, doon, ka, doon, doon, ka. Right? You're breaking up something in a way that allows it to start and restart every time.
yeah.
A lot of times I'll come up with grooves like that, and Billy will be like, but then he'll get to understand it, like why the emotional content of it becomes a vital part of it. In order to do this stuff, two things have to happen. You have to be willing to lose,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to be willing to fail in front of anyone, which is our job. Our job as musicians is to expose ourselves in a way that people are afraid to do. Our job as musicians is to make people feel things. Our job as musicians is to take chances that people normally wouldn't, or anybody in their right mind wouldn't. Our job as musicians is to give people permission to fail as human beings. That's what art is. So you have to have